What's up, my friend? Abby here, and welcome back to Writer's Life Wednesdays, where we come together to help you make your story matter and make your author dreams come true. Today, we're picking up right where we left off in last week's video, talking about Act 3, the climax of your story. We've been breaking down each story beat of the 3-act story structure, so if you missed all the previous videos, you're gonna wanna go back and binge watch them. The playlist is right there. But if you've been following along for a while now, let's jump right into today's video, and it is my favorite story beat. I've been waiting so long to talk about it. The aha moment, also known as the most important, vital, crucial part of your story. Like, the rest of your story is literally just the packaging for this moment. Let me explain. Why does your story matter? Good question. What if I told you that there's a science behind every great story? I don't just teach you how to write. I teach you how to change the world with your story and make your author dreams come true. We started this series a while ago talking about character arcs and why they're so important. Because without a character arc, you really don't have a story. You just have a random assortment of stuff happening to a random assortment of people. But if you've been following this series and crafting your story with deeply conflicted characters, then you have a masterpiece in the works. And now it's time to take your character arc full circle. Let's go back to that line graph that I showed you before. This is what your protagonist's positive character arc looks like. And as you can see, we've already covered a lot of ground. Last week, we talked about the disaster dark moment, which has led your character to this point, the aha moment. Renewed hope. This is the biggest pivotal moment in your whole story. After your protagonist has been brought to their knees by the disaster, they have a revelation, an aha moment. They can suddenly see how their fear and misbelief has led them to make the wrong decisions about everything. They realize how wrong they were, but most importantly, they see that they'll have to overcome their fear and misbelief and make the right decision in order to achieve their goal, true happiness. Prompt. Ask yourself, how is my protagonist going to overcome their fear and continue to the climax, therefore developing as a character? What lesson are they going to learn and simultaneously teach the audience? This is where your character arc gets good. This is where the transformation happens. This is where the audience starts cheering the characters on and getting excited for the final climactic confrontation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. I want to pause here for a minute and really emphasize why this pivotal moment matters so much to you. Yes, you, the author, not the characters. Yes, it's going to matter to the characters as well, but this is really your moment. This is the reason why you wanted to write this story in the first place. This is the truth you want to scream from the rooftops. This is the aha moment that you've had and you want to share with the world. Imagine the whole world has stopped to listen to what you have to say. What are you going to tell them? Or if the whole world is too overwhelming to think about, just think about one person. The one person out there who is just like your protagonist. They have the same fears, the same desires, the same misbelief. Imagine you could sit down across from that person and give them truth. Give them hope. Give them purpose. What would you say? Really think about it, because that's what you're doing with this moment in your story. That's what you're doing with your story. You want to give someone an aha moment that you had, that you wish you could give other people? Well, that's exactly what you're doing with this story. You are giving this character an aha moment that you wish you could give the world. And through this story, you're actually giving it to the world. That's why writing is so cool. That's why I love it so much. That's why I make these videos. Because I genuinely want you to write a story that matters to you and to your characters and to the world. Only after your protagonist has their aha moment can they continue to the climax. Without this revelation, they don't have the courage to face their biggest challenge yet. But with this revelation, the protagonist can finally overcome her fear, crush her misbelief, and show the reader how much she's grown and developed since the beginning of the book. Okay, so I know what you're thinking by this point. Abby, please show us what this looks like in an actual story. Okay, let's get to the story examples. Last week, I told you that I wanted to show you some story examples of the disaster and dark moment, but I held off because I wanted to show you what the flow looks like through all three of these story beats: the disaster, the dark moment, the aha moment. When it's well written, these three plot points come together to create a natural movement that gives your third act the momentum it needs to sail right into the climax and finish strong. So in today's case study, we're going to ask ourselves the questions from all three of the story beats and look at how some of my favorite stories handle this turn of events. Let's start with one of my all-time favorites, which I've been discussing all along: Pride and Prejudice. As I hope you know by now, Pride and Prejudice is the story of how free-spirited Elizabeth Bennet goes from loathing Mr. Darcy for his pomposity and pride to falling in love with him. But how does this radical transformation take place? Through a disaster, dark moment, and aha moment, of course. The disaster plot point shows up when Elizabeth's 15-year-old sister Lydia runs off with the dastardly Mr. Wickham, which instantly turns her and her sisters into social pariahs and pretty much guarantees they will never marry well.
Now she's ruined.
You're all ruined.
What does this disaster specifically mean to the protagonist? How does it force her to realize that she's the one to blame for this crisis? Being a social outcast in 1800s England is pretty much the worst thing that can happen to a girl. And just when Elizabeth was starting to find Mr. Darcy and his house pretty damn attractive, now she knows all hope of that is gone. Darcy, and any other man in his right mind, wouldn't touch a ruined girl like her with a 10-foot pole. Elizabeth feels like she's to blame for this crisis because she knew what a dirtbag Wickham was. Darcy told her about how Wickham broke his little sister's heart and ran off with all the money he could get from Darcy, but Elizabeth never told her sisters about this. When Lydia runs away, Elizabeth is quick to blame herself.
No, this is my fault. I might have prevented all this merely by being open with my sisters.
How does this disaster completely disarm the protagonist and make her face off with her fear and misbelief? All through the story, we watch Elizabeth spurn societal norms and think for herself. She's a free spirit, and that's part of what Darcy grows to admire about her. Whenever he smears her family and paints them with his broad brush of pomposity, Elizabeth always calls him out on it, until disaster strikes and proves that the Bennets are, in fact, a disgrace. This disaster is especially devastating for Lizzie because of who she is and what she values. It's the darkest moment of her life because she was beginning to realize that she was falling for Mr. Darcy, and now all his arguments about her family have been legitimized. She's ruined, and she might never find a man who is her equal ever again. How is the protagonist going to overcome her fear and continue to the climax, therefore developing as a character? No sooner does Lydia go missing than word arrives that her uncle was somehow able to get Mr. Wickham to marry her, which consequently saves the Bennet family from scandal. But Lizzie is confused. Why would Wickham marry Lydia? What's in it for him? Turns out, more of Darcy's money.
Mr. Darcy.
He was the one that discovered us. He paid for the wedding, Wickham's commission, everything.
When Elizabeth realizes that it was Mr. Darcy who convinced Wickham to marry Lydia and funded the whole deal, it changes everything. Elizabeth is shocked. Her disgraceful family saved from disgrace by the man who always called them disgraceful? Seems so. Lizzie realizes in this moment that she was wrong, and Mr. Darcy isn't half as high and mighty as she is sometimes. What lesson does the protagonist learn and simultaneously teach the audience? Elizabeth realizes that while she was busy calling Darcy out for his pride and prejudice, she was being pretty arrogant and prideful too. She had decided to loathe Darcy for all eternity, but now she can't bring herself to do it. She sees the light. She sees that Darcy is actually admirable, courageous, and willing to prove his love for her. And just like that, the last man in the world she could ever be prevailed upon to marry becomes the only man in the world she would marry. I will never not be impressed by how well written that is. It's just so good. Okay, let's move on to example number 2. Another one of my favorite stories of all time. It's a Wonderful Life. You can't think of this movie and not think of the aha moment. It's what makes the story so memorable and what makes the premise so satisfying. All George Bailey ever wanted was to do great things with his life, travel the world, build things, make a difference, etc. He thinks that's what success looks like, and that's where happiness awaits. But no matter how hard he tries, he can never seem to get out of Bedford Falls, and winds up living an ordinary life which eventually drives him to the brink of suicide. That's when he's given the chance to see what the world would be like if he'd never been born.
I said I wish I'd never been born.
You've got your wish. You've never been born.
The disaster and aha moments show up when George realizes that, without him, the world is a darker place. Not only would the villainous banker Mr. Potter have overtaken Bedford Falls, but his loved ones would have ended up miserable and lonely, and his only brother would have died as a child.
Harry Bailey went to war. He got the Congressional Medal of Honor. He saved the lives of every man on that transport.
Every man on that transport died. Harry wasn't there to save them because you weren't there to save Harry.
What does this disaster specifically mean to the protagonist? How does it force him to realize that he's the one to blame for this crisis? When George wishes his life away, he doesn't think it will have any far-reaching effects. He assumes his life has been insignificant because he hasn't been the success he always wanted to be. When he realizes that he has made a significant impact on the world, he's shocked and would do anything to go back to his ordinary life. How does this disaster completely disarm the protagonist and make him face off with his fear and misbelief? It's a Wonderful Life is interesting because it has a very slow build-up to the real action and point of the story. But the details in this build-up are the point of the story. When George believes he is worth more dead than alive, he is willing to throw his life away. It seems like the most devastating moment, but it's really just the setup for a more devastating moment, when he realizes what the world would be like without him. How is the protagonist going to overcome their fear and continue to the climax, therefore developing as a character? After George has his aha moment, he realizes that, although his life hasn't been what he dreamed it would be, he would give anything to have it back.
I want to live again. Please, God, let me live again.
He finally understands his worth and overcomes his misbelief to face the climax. What lesson does the protagonist learn and simultaneously teach the audience? George Bailey's character arc teaches us a lesson about personal significance, how every person's life has more of an impact than they truly realize. True happiness isn't found in the big achievements, but in the small things, the moments when you help others and do the right thing. It may seem like an ordinary life, but it's actually more impactful and wonderful than you'll ever know. Okay, third and final story example is the movie Gifted. I was recently reminded of how much I love this film and how impressive it is that such a simple premise packs a huge emotional punch. The story is about Mary Adler, a 7-year-old math genius, but the real protagonist of the film is her uncle and guardian Frank. When Mary's gift is discovered by her teacher, it sparks a previously non-existent relationship with Mary's grandmother, who drags her son Frank through nasty legal battles trying to get custody of Mary so that she can reach her full potential as a mathematician. The disaster shows up when Frank finally makes a compromise with his mother and agrees to move Mary into a foster home. Frank loves Mary and wants to keep her, but he also is desperate to do the right thing and terrified that he's going to ruin her life.
What's your greatest fear?
That I'll ruin Mary's life.
What does this disaster specifically mean to the protagonist? How does it force him to realize that he's the one to blame for this crisis? Frank struggles with the decision to give Mary up and feels like he's failed her, the same way he feels he failed Mary's mother, who took her own life. Frank feels responsible for what happened to his sister and wants to give Mary a good life, but his mother bullies him into feeling unqualified and even neglectful. How does this disaster completely disarm the protagonist and make him face off with his fear and misbelief? It pretty much destroys Frank to give Mary up, especially because it forces him into the ring with his greatest fear. We've seen his misbelief painfully reinforced throughout the course of the film, and we know that it's going to take a major wake-up call for him to overcome it. How is the protagonist going to overcome his fear and continue to the climax, therefore developing as a character? The aha moment arrives through an unlikely situation, when Frank discovers that Mary's beloved cat has been put up for adoption. Her foster parents say it's due to allergies, but Frank knows what that means. His mother, who is allergic to cats, has infiltrated Mary's life behind his back. That spurs Frank into action. He heroically saves her cat and decides to confront his mother and bring Mary back. What lesson does the protagonist learn and simultaneously teach the audience? Although Frank might not be the most qualified parent, he realizes that he can give Mary something that his mother never gave him, or his sister: love. He overcomes his fear of making a mistake when it dawns on him that giving Mary up would be the biggest mistake of his life. And in the end, he discovers that he was doing the right thing all along, by following his heart.
And then it dawned on me, if Mary is this amazing, smart, sweet human being, then I must be doing something right.
Okay, boom, I know that was a lot. I always get carried away with the story examples, but I wanted to give you a good idea of what it looks like in actual stories so that you can craft your own aha moment with clarity and confidence. Let's recap what we learned today about the aha moment. Only after your protagonist has their aha moment can they continue to the climax. Without this revelation, they don't have the courage to face their biggest challenge yet. But with this revelation, the protagonist can finally overcome their fear, crush their misbelief, and show the reader how much they've transformed since the beginning of the book. Remember, if you don't have a character arc, you don't have a story. You just have a random assortment of stuff happening to a random assortment of people. Your character's arc is what makes your story engaging, satisfying, and memorable. Why does the aha moment matter to you? This is the reason why you wanted to write this story in the first place. This is the truth you want to scream from the rooftops. If the whole world stopped to listen, what would you say? Bring your passion into the aha moment and you will leave a lasting impression on your audience. Ask yourself, how is my protagonist going to overcome their fear and continue to the climax, therefore developing as a character? What lesson are they going to learn and simultaneously teach the audience? Okay guys, we're getting really close to the end of this journey, but before we go to the climactic confrontation, I'm gonna make a video next time. I'm gonna make a video about the alternative story beat, which is the moment of temptation. So that's an alternative for the disaster dark moment. And that video is coming, watch out for it, and the link will eventually be right there. Smash that like button if you liked this video, and be sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because I post writing videos and publishing videos every single Wednesday, and I would love to have you here in the community. Also, be sure to check out my Patreon, because that's where we go beyond videos and take storytelling to the next level. The Patreon community is not only the best way to support what I'm doing here on YouTube, but it's also the only way to connect one-on-one with me and get better guidance on your story. So go to patreon.com/Abbie Emmons and check out all the awesome exclusive content I have over there for you. Until next week, my friend, rock on.